Okay, let's dive right into this explainer where we unpack the fascinating 2003 South African Constitutional Court case of Peter Siegwart Wallach. We're going to see what actually happens when a citizen tries to completely bypass the standard rules of legal hierarchy. It's a classic David versus Goliath scenario, but with a highly unusual twist. David decides to completely ignore the rulebook. This case serves as an absolute masterclass in procedural law, and it's a stark reminder of why the legal system is structured the way it is, layer upon layer.
The core conflict here asks a really fascinating question. What actually happens when you try to bypass the legal system and go straight to the highest court in the land? Here we have Mr. Wallach, a desperate farmer acting as his own lawyer, what the courts refer to as an unrepresented or lay litigant. He is going head-to-head with the strict, unforgiving procedural rules of the Constitutional Court of South Africa. He's frustrated, he's determined, and he's taking a massive legal swing. But as we'll soon see, pure passion doesn't always translate to proper legal procedure.
Now, legal battles of this magnitude, they rarely happen overnight. Wallach's story is an exhausting marathon that builds across a decade-long timeline, starting with the loss of his estate in October 1990. For 10 long years, he waited for his automatic rehabilitation, which finally arrived in October 2000. He must have thought his ordeal was absolutely over. But fast forward a bit to May 2002, and he faces a crushing high court defeat that completely derails his progress and pushes him right to the edge. To really wrap our heads around the stakes here, we have to understand sequestration. This isn't just abstract paperwork. It literally meant Mr. Wallach lost control of his registered farm to his trustees for a grueling 10 years. It is the complete surrender of your estate. Imagine living on your own land, but having all of your financial independence legally stripped away, handed over to appointed trustees whose sole job is to pay off your creditors. That heavy reality is what Wallach woke up to every single day for a decade.
But there is a built-in light at the end of the tunnel. Exactly 10 years later, in October 2000, Section 127A of the Insolvency Act kicked in, automatically rehabilitating his legal status simply through the pure passage or efflection of time. It's a brilliant piece of legal mechanics, really. It doesn't require a massive, expensive court battle. It just requires the clock to run its course. For Wallach, this was the moment. The decade was up, the efflection of time had occurred, and on paper, his legal autonomy was completely restored.
But here's the catch, and it's a massive one. The master of the High Court and his former trustees had placed a caveat on his farm, meaning despite his legal rehabilitation, he was entirely blocked from freely owning or transferring his own land. A caveat is a powerful legal red flag. It tells the Register of Deeds to completely freeze the property. So imagine Wallach's horror. He is technically and legally rehabilitated by time, yet his most valuable asset, his home and farm, remains completely chained down.
So, understandably desperate to clear this caveat, Wallach brought motion proceedings before Judge Klassen in the High Court, but his application was flatly dismissed with costs, prompting him to take a drastic and highly unconventional next step. This was the breaking point. Not only did the High Court tell him no, the caveat stays, but they also ordered him to pay the opposing side's legal costs. For a man just coming out of a decade of insolvency, this dismissal was a devastating blow that catalyzed his next, incredibly ill-advised legal maneuver.
Instead of filing a standard appeal, Wallach filed for direct access to the Constitutional Court under Rule 17, demanding that the High Court's judgment be declared completely unconstitutional and invalid. He just completely abandoned the normal judicial staircase. He wasn't just asking a higher court to gently review Judge Klassen's decision. He was aggressively demanding that the highest court in the country reach down and magically wipe the ruling out of existence, claiming it violated his property rights and his right to equal protection under the law.
And right here, this brilliantly illustrates his fundamental legal misunderstanding. If a court makes a mistake, the correct remedy is to lodge an appeal to review the decision. It is not to demand the highest court simply erase the judgment as a total nullity. This is a foundational concept in law. You can't just ask a court to pretend a lower court's ruling never happened. You have to formally point out the error and ask for a correction through the appeals process. Wallach's application was, from its very first sentence, fundamentally misconceived.
Now, the court noted that even if they generously treated his application as a request for a direct appeal under Rule 18, his legal paperwork was fatally defective on multiple fronts. The 10 justices of the Constitutional Court actually tried to look past his flawed request for a nullity. They tried to reframe his case into something legally coherent, a direct appeal. But even with the highest court in the land bending over backward to accommodate him, the actual foundation of his paperwork was totally crumbling.
So what went wrong?
Well, Wallach missed two absolutely massive checkmarks. He completely lacked a Rule 18 certificate, and he critically failed to cite the Master of the High Court and his trustees as actual respondents in the case. A Rule 18 certificate is essentially your permission slip to appeal directly, and he just didn't have one, nor did he explain why. But the biggest misstep was failing to join the Master and the trustees. If you want a court order that affects someone's rights, the law mandates you officially invite them to the fight. Wallace simply didn't do that.
While Wallach had physically served papers to the attorneys of the trustees and the master, the court explicitly ruled that this action alone does not legally join them as parties to the constitutional court proceedings. This is a very common trap for those without legal training. Wallach thought that just because he dropped the documents off of their lawyer's office, they were officially part of the lawsuit. But the law is meticulous. Serving papers is just the delivery method. Formally citing them as respondents in your notice of motion is what actually brings them under the court's jurisdiction. But even beyond missing certificates and absent parties, Wallach's strategy collapsed because he entirely ignored the proper judicial chain of command regarding the Insolvency Act. The justice system is not a buffet where you get to pick which court you want to complain to. It is a strictly ordered hierarchy. By trying to vault straight to the constitutional court, Wallach was essentially skipping vital rungs on the ladder that the law demands be respected, and for a very specific reason.
Because his case relied so heavily on interpreting the Insolvency Act, the proper progression meant his appeal belonged first in the Supreme Court of Appeal. That middle step is absolutely vital because they specialize in interpreting complex national statutes like the Insolvency Act. Only after they have had their say, and only if there is still a pressing constitutional issue, do you move up to step 3. Wallach tried to leapfrog the entire system.
Now, despite this sheer volume of procedural errors, the Constitutional Court did show some empathy, officially granting condonation for his late filing because they recognized the severe difficulties of litigating without a lawyer. Condonation is essentially judicial forgiveness for missing a deadline. The court specifically noted that it was not in the interest of justice to be overly technical about his tardiness, especially since no other parties were prejudiced by the delay. It's a fascinating, brief moment of human grace inside a very rigid machine.
But, and this is a big but, grace for a missed deadline does absolutely not excuse a fundamentally flawed legal strategy, leading all 10 justices to unanimously conclude that granting his application would violate the interests of justice. You can be forgiven for being a few days late, sure, but you cannot be forgiven for filing a case that makes zero structural sense. Empathy has strict limits when the procedural integrity of the entire justice system is at stake, which brings us to the final definitive ruling. So, in a swift summary judgment, the court officially dismissed his bid for direct access, crushing his legal shortcut. But in the balance struck here, they mercifully spared his wallet, refusing to order him to pay the state's legal costs. They stopped his misstep without financially ruining him further. This incredibly complex cautionary tale leaves us with a profound question. How do we perfectly balance giving grace to unrepresented individuals with upholding the strict rules that keep our legal system functioning? Peter Wallach's decade-long battle to win back his farm shows us that while the courts can be accommodating to those who don't understand the rules, they will never simply throw the rulebook away. The ladder of justice must be climbed one step at a time. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this gave you a whole new appreciation for the intricate mechanics of procedural law.